Welcome to the Integrate This EdTech podcast. We are at Sioux Falls still. We're at the TIE conference, and this is day 2. It's a very rainy day too, and we wanted to give you a recap of what our day was like today. This is the final day. Jeremy's going to talk a little bit though about the festivities last night. So.
Sure. So, one of the fun things that you can do when you go away to a conference like this, a technology conference, I think especially, is that there are many social type activities that take place after the actual sessions of the conference. And I think the unique thing here that we both thought last night is they gathered the attendees together at a place called Remedy 611, which is a brewery and events center. That's a little bit under construction yet. They plan to have some of that work done soon. But they also brought in a hypnotist and provided some rip-roaring laughter and entertainment watching some of those people on stage. I don't want to get into necessarily what your thoughts are about the legitimacy of hypnotism as anything other than entertainment value. However, it did entertain us for the evening, and we had a good time there. And made it back here today too.
Yeah, and they even have a crew here that was passing out like drink tokens for everybody for Remedy 611. So staff there was awesome. They were super friendly people, and it's a good time. So as far as today goes, like we started out with breakout sessions right away, and they still have mixed in like these little ed chats throughout the day, and they are kind of like the transition time before a next breakout session block. So the first one that I went to was really great, and it was on AI and PD, so more particularly like focusing on reimagining PD in bite-sized chunks. There was a website called 7 Tabs that I'm going to really dive into because it has to do with training people on various topics in bite-sized chunks. So it's kind of like when you are going to have somebody learn something, this is a really effective way to do it because they just progress through it and it doesn't take them hours upon hours to do it. Granted, I don't know if you can do that with everything, but I think it's really good for people to use, especially in our profession where we do need to help teachers learn different tools, to be able to get it in a digestible piece of information and not be overwhelmed right away. I think it's actually a good way to introduce something to staff. So that was honestly probably my highlight of the entire conference because I took a lot away from that I think will actually be helpful for me to dive into. So
I wonder, do they pair that with any sort of like micro credentialing along with that? Like you finish the first little part and then you can get a little badge or a little
or like CEUs or something.
CEU for a certain amount of time based on what you put into it, I guess. But
yeah, you definitely could build that in. I think it just depends on what your goal is, what you want to use it for. Like for us who builds PD on demand, I thought about it in terms of that and being able to give those opportunities to teachers, but again, like in smaller chunks. And really, I think you could even build out an entire course in like 10-minute chunks if you wanted to. But
sure.
One of the things he emphasized was keeping things, within a relatively good time frame. Like if you go to YouTube and you're trying to learn like how to, saw your table or something, I don't know, whatever.
I thought you were going to say like saw your arm off.
Yeah,
like
something.
Maybe not that extreme.
People, because that's something that we already do. We all go to YouTube, we look at things, tutorials for stuff that we're just trying to do, and we do that constantly. And so if you take that same concept, like how we go to YouTube and we find something to help us with whatever our current problem is, house project or whatever, and it takes that concept and also incorporates AI and builds out these cards as tutorials, and then so it's a very similar concept to that, and then you're able to learn on the fly. You don't have to dedicate a ton of time to it, and I think that's great. Conference style stuff is great too, like going to hour sessions are great. It just depends on what your end goal is, I guess.
And it doesn't seem to be very intimidating if you know that your little micro course or your micro thing is going to only be 10, 15 minutes long.
Right. Yeah.
That, hey, I can knock a couple of these out in in one sitting, you know?
Yeah, one thing he actually mentioned too was just using it for communication purposes. So if you're like you're an administrator and you actually need your staff to be aware of something, doing it that way, and just then sending it to them so they can get that. But 7 Tabs is one of the main sites that we looked at, and so like I said, I'm going to dig into that and continue going, and it's cool.
And maybe there's a future episode about something along those lines.
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
That sounds like one I'd be interested in here too. Cool. This morning I went to the first session on EduAid, and it was presented by the CEO and founder of EduAid, whose name is Thomas Thompson. He is, even still to this day, an educator in South Boston. He's a social studies teacher that co-teaches with a special ed teacher in his classroom, and they do a lot of that work together. And he basically built this platform along with a couple of his partners on their time outside of school. And I don't know, I did ask the question in the session, like, how do you balance your day job
Yeah, no kidding.
Starting an AI platform for educators. And EduAid was honestly something that I'd looked at, say, like last summer or maybe even early this fall. And initially when I saw it, I thought, okay, there's great potential here. But then I was comparing it with tools like Magic School that seem to have much more of that just kind of visually engaging kind of draw that brings you into their platform, that it's easy to follow. Here's a button for this and here's a button for that in Magic School, and I thought EduAid looked like a little more unpolished or less refined. But after looking at it here again today and seeing this time that has gone by and the developments that they've made to that platform, I think is something that I think both of us are going to dive into as well. And so we were even able to get a free premium version of it for the rest of the school year by attending that session. So that's definitely something I'm going to be exploring, more of those features and how to make them more accessible to teachers as well. But also it's also, he also did say too that they have their free version, which will give you, like, I think he said up to 15 uses at a time. But then he said after that it's $5.99 a month for the premium platform. But he said if you're a teacher that is in a financial hardship situation, if you contact them, there are 0 people that they have turned away and said, no, you must be able to pay. So, I mean, they're really in it for what they can do to really help the teachers. And, I think that's just kind of like a great model for it. And I think the fact that he's still a classroom teacher, that he's still in those trenches of things that we're talking about, and can actually relate and have that little bit more empathy of a classroom teacher as well. So that's something I'm looking forward to as well. And then, it also, yesterday, I don't think I mentioned it, but I went to a session where they talked about Diffit, which again is another platform that I've looked at before, but I thought was kind of like, okay, this is good, but they're, the tools there are things that could be found in other places, and I just thought it wasn't as polished either. But now seeing that, I'm wanting to go back. So it's really kind of, not something you want to totally forget about a tool just because you looked at it once and you thought, oh, I don't really have a use for this yet. To go back to those tools and give it another chance, give it a second or third try and see if it's made any progress, made any developments, because we all know we don't always learn something right the first time, that it takes several different attempts and practices at things before we really get to that mastery level. And why is that not the same for some of our EdTech softwares that we look at too? So don't be afraid to do that. Give some of those tech tools that you thought were outdated, maybe look at them again and see if they've been refreshed and are now maybe something you could really, really utilize.
Yeah, and Jeremy and I actually talked about that too, about how we had kind of the same perception of a tool like EduAid, but then even with Magic School, if you've watched our tutorials on that, like from the time that we looked at that to shortly after, I mean, the changes that have made, or like the addition of Magic School student, so all these things are always moving, and I mean that's how technology is. But that's part of why we're here. We can hopefully keep you guys updated on all these different things, and that's one thing we talked about too, was continuing to look at like a DFIT, EduAid for future tutorials, and trying to actually connect with some of these folks too at the conference. I think that's been a huge takeaway, is to be able to connect with some of these professionals that are doing different things from us, and then have them come on podcasts so that everybody that watches can benefit from their knowledge and some of the things that they are doing out in the education field. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's, the networking that you can make here at a conference too with other educators and presenters. Boy, every presenter that I've ever been to for a session, I bet for the last 10 years, has always been very much, let's get in contact. I want to share with you, let's, find a way that we can connect again to extend both of our learning. So look for things like that to take place here on this podcast, I think, coming up here in the near future as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, our next episode will be out soon, and we're happy we could bring this to you guys, and hopefully you can make it to one of these conferences at some point too, because they're definitely beneficial and you meet a lot of cool people. So
yeah, now we get to drive home. Fun.
Yes, you get to drive further than me.
I do.
Awesome. See you, everybody.